the election weave. Here's my challenge. I want to explain to you how easy the Israeli elections are to understand. I know everyone talks about how complicated the Israeli election system is. I don't think that's true. And so this is going to be my challenge. I want to explain to you why it's simple. I think it's simple because I think that we're looking at the Israeli elections like you'd look at a woven piece of cloth. If you look at a finished piece of cloth, which has been woven together with different colours and different threads, so it looks kind of opaque. But actually, if you break it down into its different layers, each layer in and of itself is quite simple. Anyway, that's my theory. So in this video, I'm just going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to explain these three woven layers. The three layers are the main issues that are being talked about, that you need a majority, and that a coalition is made up of common ground plus compromise. And then in addition to that, I'm just going to add in what are the unique issues this time round and the upshots of the way that this system works. That's all. So, straight into it. Here's the first layer. What are the three main issues in the Israeli elections? For the last 2 or 3 elections, the three main issues have been like this. First off is the question of how should we act towards creating a Palestinian state. And there's a sliding scale between those who think that we should act now and create a Palestinian state right now, and those who think that we should never create a Palestinian state. And my take on the polling currently, and we're just over a week before the elections, I'm going to say that looking at the polling, about 75% of Israel's population is planning to vote for parties that are located pretty much over the right-hand side of this scale, from never to not really, or not for a while yet. That seems to be what the polls are saying. That's the first issue. The second issue is about the economy. Should the budget of a country be about the freedom of people or the welfare of the people? Should we have a free market or should we have a welfare state? A lot of this emerges from, in 2011, the social justice protests which preceded Occupy Wall Street. These protests brought out 7% of the entire Israeli population onto the streets. Just think about that. That's the equivalent of around 25 million Americans coming out to the streets to fight against capitalism. Anyway, these people came out to the streets. I would say that in terms of changing significant policy, these protests haven't yet achieved what they hoped to, but they have spawned at least 2 or 3 new political parties fighting on these issues. There are several fighting politicians who've come onto the scene as a result and as having worked on the protests. And most importantly, they've shifted the discourse about these issues. People will talk about being chevrati, being social, and what they mean about social justice is specifically to do with the way in which a national budget is distributed and the way in which the poorer people or the less well-off are looked after. You get interesting bedfellows along this scale because, for example, you probably meet Hadash, which is the Jewish Arab Communist Party, over on the left-hand side of this scale, together with Shas, the Haredi ultra-Orthodox Sephardi Party. These guys share common interests on this scale, but not on the next scale, which is about religion and state. Here, the separation between state and religion and the combination of religion and state is another key issue. Whilst Hadash and Shas would come together on the economy question, they go totally separate ways when we talk about religion and the connection between religion and the state. They're also kind of separate on what their attitude to the Palestinian state is. So those are the 3 main issues. 3 main issues which have come up again and again. So that's layer 1. The second layer, you need a majority. It's the same as any other country. It's the same in the United States, that you need a majority in the House of Representatives, you need a majority in the Senate. In the UK, you need a majority in the House of Parliaments. In Israel, you need a majority in the Knesset. There are 120 Knesset members, 120, which means that you need 61 people all on your side in order to have a majority. Now, it's that simple. Everyone gets confused about this whole thing about coalitions, but really, even the United States is made up of two big coalitions. I mean, really, when you look at it, you've got the Tea Party, you've got the Romney Party, you've got the MAGA Party, and roughly speaking, they're sort of drawn together into one party, which you're going to call the Republican Party, but it's effectively a coalition of right-leaning parties. And the same on the other side, you've got the AOC party, the Clinton party, the Obama party, roughly drawn together into another coalition. The key difference between American politics and Israeli politics is that in the United States, the coalitions are formed before the elections. These different wings have already come together on a kind of a common platform, which they then put to the electorate. So the elector has to choose between one coalition or another coalition. In Israel, the voter votes for the particular individual parties, and then the coalitions get formed after the elections. So how do coalitions get formed? Well, first of all, they get formed through common ground. So let's look at the Likud. I'm going to say, roughly speaking, the Likud was certainly over to the right of the question of the Palestinian state, certainly over to the right on the question of the economy, and roughly over on the right in the question of religion and state. Now let's look at what's commonly seen as their greatest rival, the Blue and White Party. Roughly speaking, I'm going to put Blue and White pretty much on the same place vis-à-vis the Palestinian state. Others will say differently, but I'm just going to say that the leader of the Likud party has publicly said that he's in favour of a two-state solution, and number 3 on the Blue and White list has publicly said that there should never be a Palestinian state. So I'm going to put them roughly in a similar place. I'm also going to roughly put them in a similar place on the economy, although others would argue differently. Most of my Marxist friends would say in terms of policy, not in terms of rhetoric, but in terms of policy, Likud and Blue and White are pretty much in the same place, which would seem to say that these two parties have a lot in common. Coalitions are made up of common ground, and it would seem like Likud and Blue and White share common ground. But then on the question of religion and state, Blue and White are much further over to the left. The number 2 in the Blue and White Party, Yair Lapid, has been very, very active in working against the political interests of the Haredi parties, of the ultra-Orthodox parties, whereas the Likud has often seen them as their natural partners. So on the face of it, you would think, okay, no common ground, therefore these two parties couldn't work together. But the key is that coalitions are not only built according to where a party says that they believe things should be. It's also down to where a party is willing to compromise. And the key with these compromises is that, for example, on this issue, I've deliberately put the Likud word in a smaller font, because Likud may well be willing to compromise on this issue, and therefore the question of religion and state isn't a matter which would break the two of them apart. It's not only a question of ideals, it's a question of compromise. Ideals may tell us something important about what we would like to be, but compromises tell us who we are. This is Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit who talks about this in his book on compromise. That especially in Israeli politics, you need to judge the politician and the party according to what they're not going to budge on. Not just what they say they believe in, but what they will not compromise over. So those are the 3 layers you need to get a hold of. That's all. There are 3 layers. Layer number 1 is that there are issues. Layer number 2 is that you need a majority. And layer number 3 is that you build a coalition according to common ground and compromise. Here's where the two parties come apart, not on religion and state, but because there's a new issue in 2019, and that issue is Benjamin Netanyahu himself. And Blue and White is a party that was established specifically in order to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. This is an issue that Blue and White cannot compromise on, and as such, they can't ever be a partner with Likud except for two possibilities. One possibility is if at any point the Likud party chooses to remove Benjamin Netanyahu as their leader, then this issue goes away, or if Blue and White choose to deeply betray their voters, which has happened before, but it's unlikely. The second new issue for this year is about the judicial system. Judges in Israel are appointed with little interference from politicians. This means that the judges in Israel, and in particular on the Supreme Court, are seen to be more detached, more objective, seeing the long term. And at the same time, they're also seen by certain sectors of the population as being disconnected from the population, far more secular than most of the population are, and far more liberal than most of the population are. And there's a drive to turn Israel basically into an American system whereby judges are political appointments. This has been particularly important to another potential coalition ally of the Likud. Likud stand roughly to the right of this question, but even more so stand the New Right. The New Right never want there to be a Palestinian state, are pretty much free market, and their big thing is changing the judicial system to be in the hands of politicians and therefore, as they would say, further in the hands of the public. So from this system, there are just a couple of upshots that we'll just point out. The single issue party. For example, and there are other parties like this, but we'll just hone in on one party, the Gesher party. This is a party which was established by Orly Levy Abacasis, and this party is taking a stand on one of these 5 issues. She is only taking a stand on the welfare line, and she is saying that if I am going to come into a coalition, I want to be the health minister. I want to be the minister of health, and I want there to be a budget for me to fix the health system in Israel. Which means she's also saying, I give you a free pass. You can choose what you want about the Palestinians. You can choose whichever leader you want. You can choose whatever you want to do with religion and state and the judicial system, so long as I am allowed to put all my efforts and have a budget to fix the health system. This means that Orly Levy Abacasis is a very handy person to put in your coalition. All you need to do is guarantee her a budget for her to do what she wants with the health system, and you're free to do whatever you want on every other issue. So that's the upside. The upside is that Orly Levy could end up being a health minister. The downside is that because she's only standing on one issue, not every voter wants to vote only according to one issue. And as a result, Orly Levy Abacasis' party, the Gesher party, is polling low. It may poll below the threshold. She needs to get 3.25% of the voters in order to get into the Knesset. That's roughly about 140,000, 150,000 voters. If she gets 150,000 votes, she's in the Knesset, and she's almost a shoo-in for being a minister in the government. If she gets under 150,000, she's probably unemployed. These and more are what's at stake in the Israeli elections coming up on April the 9th, 2019. This was brought to you as part of a project that Makom of the Jewish Agency is doing together with Moshe House and funded by the Jim Joseph Foundation. It's called 4HQ Israel Encounters, and you can find out more about the program on 4hqisrael.com. I'm Robbie Gringrass, and all that remains to say is that you should have your say. Makom is running parallel elections for people not living in Israel. If you just go to this link, bit.ly/parallel elections, all one word, you'll be able to have a vote, and we'll be able to see how people who are not Israelis are voting similarly or differently from Israelis. Thanks.